Nobody fails all at once. And that is the most important thing to understand about failure. Because the story we tell about it is almost always wrong, almost always locates the cause in a single dramatic moment, a bad decision, a missed opportunity, an unlucky turn. When the truth that the psychology of failure reveals is far more uncomfortable and far more useful than that, which is that most people fail in life not in one decisive moment, but across thousands of invisible ones, not through a single catastrophic choice, but through the daily accumulation of small surrenders that individually feel completely harmless and collectively constitute the architecture of an unlived life. And today, we are going inside that architecture completely, not to devastate you, but to show you precisely where the failure is actually being built. Because you cannot dismantle a structure you cannot see. And most people spend their entire lives failing without ever once accurately identifying the psychological mechanism that is making it happen. The first and most fundamental reason most people fail is one that the entire self-help industry has discussed endlessly and almost nobody has addressed at the level that actually produces change. And that is the failure of identity, not the failure of strategy, not the failure of effort, not even the failure of belief in the naive motivational sense, but the specific psychological failure of never becoming, at the level of genuine self-concept, the kind of person whose daily behavior naturally produces the outcomes they say they want. Most people approach their goals from the outside in. They identify a desired outcome. They attempt to produce the behaviors that would achieve it. And they rely on motivation and willpower to bridge the gap between who they currently are and what they are currently trying to do, which creates a psychological structure that is inherently unstable because motivation is variable, willpower is depletable, and the behavioral identity of the person they are trying to be is in continuous conflict with the behavioral identity of the person they actually are. And in that conflict, identity wins every single time. Not occasionally, not usually, but every single time across every domain of human behavior that psychology has ever studied, which is why the person who is trying to become disciplined will always be defeated by the person who simply is disciplined, why the person trying to become a reader will always struggle where the person who identifies as a reader does not, and why the most important work any person who wants to stop failing can do is not the acquisition of better strategies, but the painstaking, uncomfortable, identity-level work of genuinely becoming the person whose natural behavior produces the life they say they want. The second reason most people fail, and this one is the one that operates most invisibly and causes the most damage precisely because it feels the most virtuous, is the failure of honest confrontation with reality, the specific, costly, psychologically understandable, but ultimately devastating tendency to manage uncomfortable truths about one's own situation through the sophisticated cognitive mechanisms of denial, minimization, and the perpetual revision of timelines that converts genuine failure into temporary setbacks so seamlessly and so automatically that the person doing it rarely notices it is happening. Psychologist Shelley Taylor's research on positive illusions documents that most people maintain slightly inflated beliefs about their own abilities, their control over outcomes, and the likelihood that their plans will succeed. And in moderate doses, these positive illusions are genuinely adaptive, providing the motivational buffer that allows people to attempt things whose difficulty they would be paralyzed by if they saw it clearly. But in excess, in the specific excess that characterizes the person who is failing repeatedly and interpreting each failure as an anomaly rather than a pattern, who is consistently overestimating their progress and underestimating the effort required, who is protecting a self-concept of capability while producing evidence of the opposite. Positive illusions stop being motivationally useful and become the psychological mechanism that makes the failure permanent. Because the person who cannot accurately see where they are cannot accurately navigate to where they want to be, and no amount of optimism has ever substituted for the specific, uncomfortable, psychologically demanding act of looking at your own life with complete honesty and deciding that the truth, however confronting, is more useful than the story. The third reason, and the one that will resonate most painfully with the most people, is the failure of patience in a world that has made impatience the default cognitive mode of an entire generation. The specific psychological inability to sustain effort and commitment across the time horizons that any meaningful achievement actually requires in a culture that has industrialized instant gratification, to the point where the brain's reward system has been so thoroughly recalibrated toward immediate return that the delayed, compounding, invisible for months or years return of genuine long-term investment feels neurologically indistinguishable from no return at all. Most people do not fail because they never start. They fail because they stop at precisely the point where the people who succeed keep going, at the point where the effort has been sustained long enough to feel expensive, but not yet long enough to feel rewarded, at the point where the gap between current reality and desired reality is at its most psychologically discouraging, and the siren call of a fresh start, a new strategy, a different goal is at its most neurologically compelling. And the tragedy of this specific failure pattern is not just that it prevents the achievement of any particular goal, but that it builds, through repetition, a self-concept organized around the experience of not finishing, a neural identity of someone who tries and moves on, which makes the next attempt structurally more likely to end at the same point, because the brain is extraordinarily competent at producing the behaviors that are consistent with the identity it has built. So, here is the final truth, the one that makes this entire video worth watching and worth sitting with honestly, rather than moving past it into the comfortable numbness of the next piece of content. Most people fail in life not because life is unfair, not because the system is rigged, not because they were unlucky or untalented or born into the wrong circumstances, though all of those things are sometimes real and sometimes matter. They fail because they never do the one thing that all genuine success in every domain requires, which is to look at themselves with complete honesty, to see the gap between the identity they are performing and the identity they are living, to feel the discomfort of that gap without flinching away from it, and to make the specific daily, unglamorous, completely unspectacular decision to close it, not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when motivation returns, but now, in the ordinary, unremarkable moment that most people are already spending deciding that now is not quite the right time. Subscribe for more mind secrets.